welcome back. I'm absolutely delighted that Anna and I have had another opportunity to kind of just zone in really to the very first stage of the therapeutic package we kind of designed together really and put together. Anna didn't really know how much involvement of putting the package together, but we knew that this was quite different from every other presentation. And in our last episode, we kind of left you thinking about why we needed some more mental health input and more of an intense nature, because what had happened in the past had led our young person to have, well, another breakdown when they turned 16. And I won't repeat everything because I hope you would enjoy to go and watch it and learn a bit more about the journey. But certainly from now, we are going to look at that first stage. So we're going to break it down into chunks. We're going to think about the first session and the second session. So sit back, enjoy, get a cup of and listen to what Anna's going to convey, because it's a really remarkable and interesting pieces of information that are sewn together with the various individuals involved. So Anna, the very first session we had, perhaps you could remind me, but also think about for the others who are watching as to what it was like on our first meeting.
I think it was not unduly different to many other first meetings, in that we had to get we had to kind of talk background, we had to talk here and now, what was going on, that basics, that kind of stuff. I suppose as anyone that's had a child with additional needs, you get so used to it, or had any sort of additional medical needs themselves, you just get so used to that telling the story, and we focused a lot on the here and now because we'd done a lot of the background in the prior work, but the kind of the facts, that the who was involved, what was involved, how they were involved, and my young person had got quite a few people involved, but it felt a bit bitty. I think it probably still feels a bit bitty. Certainly wasn't joined up, because I think because they weren't in an education setting, and I think that happens when they're not in an education setting. There isn't that sort of natural structure and around a young person and around a family. So all that coordination was coming down to me. And not particularly successfully, because also my young person was getting on. They were 19 when that started, rising 20, and they needed independence but couldn't manage that independence. So it was quite tricky, but we had bits of support. So me providing a lot of it, a personal assistant coming in with social care budget, who had been just revolutionary for me, because it's the first time I'd ever really been able to share some of the practical responsibilities, and it certainly helped me having them involved, help me on a practical level. It helped me just keep going, not burning out myself. And then my older daughter, also, we're a close-knit family, we're a tight family, we work very much together as a family, and we support each other. So she's been involved. There's a multidisciplinary team. There's still a multidisciplinary team loosely. Key people within that are someone who's helping us coordinate, an occupational therapist who'd really, I think I spoke about her last time, she'd been quite involved in the multidisciplinary team, really supporting us very practically, but as very much a sticking plaster, in her words. Just telling us very clearly she wasn't the right person to be moving us forward, but she could kind of have a good go at holding us together in the meantime whilst we found the right way to move forward. And she did an amazing job at that, but she was very involved at that stage. A bit of support from somebody who was helping just coordinate with background stuff with the package, emails and organising team meetings and minutes for team meetings and things like that. A counsellor, my young person was seeing a counsellor weekly, and the counsellor wasn't really involved in the, it was a very much an add-on, the counsellor. I don't know what sort of other experiences of counselling that other people have had are, but for us it was definitely, I can remember beginning early days of working with the counsellor, she even struggled to talk to me, even answer my emails about practical things, because she was dealing with an adult and found it quite difficult that some of the stuff was being dealt with by me, not the person themselves. And I think that they found that client confidentiality, that they were having to think quite carefully and act quite differently from how they usually acted, perhaps. But they were working every week, and I just remember their face, because sometimes my young person doesn't always turn up to things when they're very anxious. And there were occasions when I turned up to the meeting just to say, just that politeness really, to say, look, they're not coming today. It's just not happening. And the counsellor's face when I sprung onto the screen and she wasn't expecting me was a bit of a picture. But we got through those early days, and she carried on working, but she didn't come to the multidisciplinary team meetings. But that was another strand. And then also, my young person is, we talked about this before, functions quite highly and quite independently on some levels. So that's always been part of the sort of, we're talking about different strings, different facets of life. That's been part of it as well, because they go out and they have hobbies and they have friends and they work part-time. And so that the coordination of that involved with all the practicalities of supporting any young person towards independence in terms of household, managing tasks, things like that. So I was sitting, I think if I can kind of draw it as a bit of an analogy, I was up sitting in the middle of it, holding everything.
Yeah.
Right from organizing appointments, getting to appointments, remembering appointments, even in the middle of the organizing and getting to them. You're getting washing done. I wasn't doing it all, but without my involvement, everything would fall apart. Shopping, food, organizing cooking, eating, medication, getting medication, ordering it, coordinating all the adults around the team, keeping an eye on working rotas, filling in timesheets, literally everything I was holding. And then the personal assistant, by the time we started, the personal assistant had come along and was taking some of that practical responsibility, but very much kind of with me. And that's kind of where we were at the start, really.
Yeah. And when we were thinking, I don't know if we can stress enough, but to those viewers who are listening, I've just realized that's a really interesting combination, isn't it? So autistic, viewers watching who are listening. Anyway, typical. Listen to the language and you'll get who's autistic or not. I digress. With setting the scene, I was having to try and get up to speed as quickly as possible. But also we were trying to set a plan, because ultimately the young person, if they had that ultimate wish, they wanted to live independently, which meant we were all striving to think about how on earth could we get from this very sticky, very challenging situation where you had been, literally trying to maneuver everything so that this young person could function. But that just meant that, it was more like a paid position as a carer, personal assistant, or a caseworker, a key worker, when in actual fact you're the parent. And we talked a lot last time about how professionals were very happy to kind of leave you with bulk risk.
Yes.
And what we really wanted was somebody who was going to come in to manage the risk, to start steering where this young person really wanted to go.
Yeah.
but also allow you to take a step back as a parent and allow the carer to come in. And it was quite
Yeah.
interesting because trying to do this in an hour session
Mm.
is not easy, is it? And but for
No.
people who work with me, they know that I type as I'm listening, because then I go back through my notes to kind of go and process and think, right, okay, what do we need to think about?
Yeah. Yeah.
But ultimately, you're trying to cram in as much information for me as possible
Mm-hmm. Mm.
in a very
Mm.
short period of time.
Yeah. And I think there's absolutely, but I think that we because we met weekly and we did just have an hour, there's definitely part of that. First of all, there's the subconscious working through the week,
Mm,
supports that, but also there's what might seem really important. Say we've met on a Thursday, what might seem really important on a Sunday, like top priority. It's interesting, often by a Tuesday or a Wednesday has sailed under the radar, like
yeah,
a week's long enough for the important things to still be a priority four,
yeah,
5, 6, 7 days later.
yeah,
Um, and the longer I might be getting ahead of myself, but that kind of it, in my mind, expanded into me starting to recognize themes and patterns during the week. Yeah,
no, nice. And the
yeah,
other thing we should say, at the beginning of our journey, we were extremely fortunate with our young person, because our young
yes,
person gave permission for everybody to be interlinked and work together.
yes,
And I think in the grand scheme of my work, certainly that's quite unusual. Usually there's somebody that a young person does not want me to liaise with,
yeah,
or a parent's, if you're in a relationship, one parent's very supportive, the other person completely disagrees and is like, I don't want to get involved with all of this, or makes it quite challenging. And this is them just playing up. They just need to get their act together. Um, but our young person was absolutely open, happy to sign a document to say, yes, I give my permission.
yeah,
Yes, I'm happy for you to work together. And suddenly this opened up such an amazing opportunity for every single one of us, because it meant that we didn't cripple ourselves and thinking, oh, I can't talk about this,
yeah,
because that permission had only been given, um, as open as this young person could be. I think there was only
yeah,
one situation where the young person asked me not to relay anything,
yeah,
and it was only as a temporary measure until they were able to tell you themselves.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that was about a new relationship coming in. But you know,
Mm,
I
fair enough.
completely respect that. Yeah,
Mm.
you know, um,
And that's interesting. That's perhaps interesting about thinking about previously other professionals' responses as well, if that's quite an interesting way of working, because that's my young person's default.
yeah,
They are very that we it's not that they share widely. We've got a very, very small, tight knit group. It's just really within the family and then the PA. But within that group, we are very, very open. And with professionals, we're very open, and she's always been very open. And
yeah,
actually, that fits that part of their fear is, it's probably quite an unusual way, particularly for adult services to be working, and that they've really struggled with that, talk to my mum as if you're talking to me kind
yeah,
of way
yeah,
of working.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
And the value that we learned, and I'm sure this will come up over and over again, but the value we learned was, even if you forgot to tell me something because
yeah,
there was other things that were important to talk about in the hour,
yeah,
somebody else would pick
would.
up on it. And so I was still given lots and lots of information, so that by the time I could see the young person, it was so much easier, because even if the young person forgot and it was something that was really impacting and exacerbating, I was able to kind of go, well, what about
Yeah.
brought to my attention?
And I yes, and as alongside that, there was that element, and I can remember that being quite powerful right through, not just in the early days, but through the whole of that first piece of work. There were
Yeah,
occasions when you were like, "What about this?" And I was like, "Oh gosh, yes." But also the other thing that speaking with more than one person, because there was this team. So you worked with me, my young person, their PA every week for an hour, and then their older sister
Yeah.
every 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Not as regularly, but you had that zone in time with them as well. And out of the four of us, the PA was coming to it with fairly fresh eyes, fairly new to the family, but long enough to know us quite well. And then my young person's older sister, my elder daughter, obviously, knows us inside out, has lived with us since forever,
Yeah.
but is now independent, so does have that slightly distant view as well. And I think that view was so powerful, because not only did it pick up things that were forgotten or there wasn't time for, but it also picked up, because ultimately, talking to me, you only get my take on it, you only get my slant on it. Talking to the PA, you only get the PA's slant on it. But to be able to triangulate for the key things and really unpick them, I
Yeah.
think that that's also been really helpful.
Yes. Yes. And I was thinking as well, with our young person, they could relate to each one of you, and the messages were still being consistent. So even though I saw each of you for a very time limited piece of work, it was so powerful, because it didn't matter. Every 2 days, our young person was having similar conversations. So it was a drip feed, drip feed, drip feed.
Yeah.
And even when they went away, to do activities with their older sibling, it was still being drip fed in
Yes.
quite a unique, amazing way, really.
Yeah, and that's different, because we've often I call it tag teamed, a bit like one of us will step up the pressure and the other one, someone else within the support network, might back off the pressure a little bit, and that, well, I pressured last week, so you put a bit of pressure on this week. We've often done that, and that this was different.
Yeah.
And I can see now why that may well induce anxiety levels rather than decrease them, because you're never quite sure which direction it's going to come from, or which mum or which sister you're going to get that day, or that
Yeah.
week.
Yeah.
Whereas in this, I think, I know you talk about being the collie dog, and you definitely have been our collie dog and kept us rounded and herded together and moving as one. But I think with you've really like been holding the hand of my young person to lead us as well. It hasn't been you doing it. It hasn't been my young person doing it. It's been the two of you together. You've held their hand as they take that lead. And so what we've done, instead of tag teaming it and being like, well, it's my turn to be the big bad mum this week, I'll take one for the team and I'll put the pressure on. We've all been quite consistent with our messaging together,
Yeah.
but not with us, not us making the decisions. My young person working with you and saying, yes, I'm ready for this, and us backing that up by allowing the freedom for them to do it, but also putting the pressure on to just give them the opportunity to do it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We know that the organizational skills were very, very poor. And we know that communication,
Yeah.
time management, all really
Yes.
poor. And
Yeah.
one of the things that you were conveying was you were having to hold so much in your head. And when we made this plan, although our young person said that they wanted to continue with the counsellor, that took a very interesting turn of events, because I was very clear that we all work as a team. We have to work together. We have to know exactly what we're doing in order to be consistent. But our counsellor was not comfortable in doing that at all, like you said
Yeah.
earlier.
Yeah.
And what was really interesting, and it did surprise me, because it will be of no surprise to anybody listening, that we had a slight wobble at the start. But then you said it is so interesting because our young person is always trying to engage with you, whereas it was an awful lot of hit and miss with the counsellor.
Yeah.
And I know that it, for me, I was learning what your anxieties were like when I was thinking, haven't got the comms today, wonder what's going on.
Yeah.
And also trying to remain as calm as possible and an even keel for everybody. You know, let's not induce panic if there's no real panic needed. But also feeling a loss for the young person who'd obviously had this opportunity to be able to just do the day-to-day stuff dumping, but actually wasn't being challenged enough. And when we're looking at repairing self-esteem, we really have got to start quite quickly off the ground about how are we going to do this. If you've got your aspirations, how am I going to get you there if we just continue to let you just vent but do nothing proactively as a change agent? And that's where I was able to kind of think with you, how are we going to do this change agent? Because we need to do it, but we need to do it in such a way that, you know, if I'm conveying what work I've done with the young person, then you've got that inside knowledge. You can then come around the other side, you know, what did you and Lavinia talk about?
Yeah.
What about this? And
Yeah.
then that reminds the young person. But it was still, there was still, in the early days, it could be hit or miss, and you were having to still do a lot of scribing over the texting,
Yes.
having to nudge and, you know, remember your time, remember the date, you know, come on, you're tired. And in the first 6 weeks, for sure, our young person really struggled with spending a lot of time still in bed, which was not unusual from your side. You know, this is a presentation that you'd seen a lot of for a long time. So I didn't know if there was anything you wanted to add to that.
Yeah. And it was I suppose just the depths of that, like it was everything. So um the only thing they were doing independently, totally independently, as in arranging, checking the time, leaving home, was going and meeting friends on a Monday night to rock climb. And still that would be probably many phone calls once they'd left home, many phone calls touching in at home on the journey there, whilst they were there, and the journey home. Many, 5, 6 wouldn't be unusual in the space of 3 hours. But everything else, so although they were working in something that they loved, real area of talent and personal interest that they're well qualified and experienced in, twice a week, it was all down to me to know what time they were leaving, what time they were working, what time they had to leave, waking them up repeatedly, you know, finding whatever was lost, uniform, car keys, whatever, to help get them out the door, then a phone call all the way often. And then phone calls between times, and then phone calls back in the other end, and then getting back home. That was quite a usual pattern. It was for everything other than this kind of one thing that they were organizing themselves. So, and that's, the skills, it's a really hard one to explain to people, because they could do it on a Monday to go and meet with their friends much more independently. So it's not a can't, but equally it's not a won't. It's something else that English doesn't have a word for. I don't know whether other languages do, but it's really difficult. And that's where we were at the beginning, everything in terms of organization. And it's I've always found it quite difficult because people have always said all of my life, well-meaning people have often said, "Oh, well, it's because she doesn't really want to go. That's why she's not just getting up and going." But actually, places she wanted to go were just as difficult to get to as places that she was struggling to go to, sometimes more so, because it was almost as if it felt like if it was somewhere I really want to go, if it goes wrong, I've lost more. Um,
Yes.
and there seems somehow to be more pressure about something you're really excited about or really looking forward to or really enjoy. Um, and but as I've seen, as we've gone on, and it wasn't quick, it was very, very, very slow. And you're right, there wasn't really any change for a long, long time. But then as I've started to see the change, the Mondays expanding and other things beginning to be as independent as Monday evening going out used to be. Um, that expansion has happened around things of interest, things of excitement, things of things that she's more confident in, which is
Yeah.
interesting. And I
Yeah.
guess it's probably quite normal, but actually they were real anxiety things before. But
Yeah.
those are pretty nailed now.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
she can now get up, set her own alarm, get up, be just like a Monday evening out with friends on a work morning now. That's a normal work morning now. She would just get up, get it organized, get off, shout goodbye on the way out, and often don't hear from her until sometimes when she's turning the key in the door. I mean, sometimes she'll drop me a call on the way home just to say, on my way home, but not always. Often, literally, just, next thing is key in the door. That's it. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and yeah, but it hasn't been quick, it's my kind of my, it's, it's very, very, very slow, but it's there. The progress is really obvious, but
Mm.
very slow.
I think it's fair to say that um, when you look at a whole life of what you've been trying to support, that first stage probably feels very fast, but in reality, it's very, it's taking one step forward, two steps back.
Mm.
You're just constantly just supporting, supporting, supporting. But over a period of time, you start looking back and you go, wow, that's pretty quick actually, because it wasn't that long ago.
Yeah.
But our memories are kind to us and allow us that softening of memory,
Mm.
and we forget the rawness. And that's why we started talking about this, didn't we, before we
Yeah. I mean, how
lost
many
that
weeks
memory.
has it been really? About 12
For the first stage,
for that
so
first
it's
stage?
12, but you started before our young
Yes.
person did. So and that was quite interesting as well. We needed to just have you start so that we could kind of get this ball rolling, so that you were able to be in a very good place to start supporting the
Yeah.
young person as I started with
Yeah, 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 yeah. Um, and I suppose it is quite quick, really, when you think about it. When what I've just described as in a typical day at work, how much, although I
yeah,
wasn't there at work, how much I was underpinning that always. Whereas now, I mean, this weekend, I got up, got ready to go out. We had my young person and I had a quick chat after they'd got themselves up. I left home before them and just said, I'm off out. I'm going out for a day. I'm going to be out all day. I might not be here when you get back. Not sure what time I'll be back. I went off and didn't give them a thought really all day, other than just just a very, it's my second child, just like I would for my first child, just that normal kind of mum. Oh, it's been quite a nice day. Hope the day's gone all right. Oh, I'm on my way home now. They'll be finished soon. I'll see them this evening. Just those kind of passing thoughts. Didn't give it a thought. I
yeah,
mean, to think if I'd have thought 4 months ago that I could have just got up and gone out for the whole day, I was 120 miles away, um, and not answered my phone or been in contact with them once throughout the day, and then got back home after they'd got back from work at night, I mean, I would have just been like, no way, not a chance. So yes, that is,
Yeah.
you know, that is quite fast progress, really. And not to be, not that, no anxiety from either of us about that.
Yeah.
That's,
Yeah. So we've just been exploring how some changes came into being. And even as early as just session 3, we were able to think about what could you and the personal assistant do differently. So do you kind of just want to give us a taster of what it was like?
yeah, I suppose we would very much, we've been working together for, the personal assistant and I had been working together for, I guess, about a year, year and a half by that point. So we were quite into a routine. And the routine was enabling my young person superficially to survive, and even I guess some people might say, achieve to some degree. Um, but that's not what their self-esteem and their confidence and their independence were not reflecting that in any way, shape, or form. And we were very much stuck in that space of knowing it was a negative cycle, but not really feeling like we'd got any choice, all of
Mm.
us, that that we would do the enabling. They would then do the achieve whatever it was superficially, but it was making them feel rubbish, because as soon as we withdrew a little bit of the enabling support, then it didn't happen. Things were missed. Food wasn't had, what every time we tried to scale it back, um, it just led to a spiral of disaster,
Mm.
which fulfilled the self-esteem shattering cycle of I can't do anything on my own. And having, I think, particularly having, there's something very unhelpful in having the mum-child relationship within that as well. Having, not only can I not do anything on my own, but I need my mum to help me, is even worse in some ways.
Mm.
Um, and we really were stuck in a spiral. We knew, everybody knew it, but we had tried many different, we tried and tried and tried, but other than just withdraw cold turkey and everything, then deal with a very unwell young person, there didn't seem to be, we didn't know what to do about it. And I can remember it was whenever I tried to talk to my young person about that, it was just met with frustration. It was never a conversation. We could never have a conversation about it. We'd mention it, and I'd be able to say things like, "But we both know it's not helpful when to you, because it doesn't make you feel good when I am doing this and this and this for you." And it would just make them so cross,
Mm.
so cross. It would never go anywhere. And I think that was part of the sticking point, that we couldn't talk about it. It just brought up emotions straight
Mm.
away and huge anxiety. Um, and being able to talk about it with you, and I guess, I wasn't in the sessions, but my young person was also able to talk about it with you in a safer space. And this is where you need the professional support, because it just creates that safe space to have the conversations in time. They were able to have those conversations with you, which was a much lower anxiety situation than having them with me, because they make me anxious as well. So when my young person
Mm.
and I try and communicate with them, Kate, about them, the anxiety straight away increases and then starts to spark off each other. But I was able to have them with you. Her PA was able to have them with you. Her sister was able to have them with you, and they were able to have them with you, all independently. And from that, I noticed quite quickly, the pattern that I noticed, and I've noticed this throughout actually over other things, but the pattern that I noticed is things that I would bring up into conversation to talk about that would create a massive anxiety response started to create much less of an anxiety response when I brought them up.
Interesting.
Not always, not again, small steps, you know, and it was looking for those, and that was what the space, being able to, by by working with you and talking to you, and then rather than that gave me, us all, the confidence to just sit back and wait before one of us would have stepped into rescue very quickly. And even if we communicated amongst the three of us, to be fair, our older sister was much better than PA and me. We were the worst. But even when we would communicate about it and say, right, we're just going to let this ride for a bit. We're not just going to step in there and rescue. You'd find that one of us had.
Yes.
Wasn't always the same one. And actually, you'd find that even within a few minutes of voicing, we're not going to go and step in and rescue this, and agreeing that sometimes one of us would, it almost that became just voicing it became too difficult, not just go and and rescue the situation and resolve it. But talking with you helped reduce those anxiety levels to allow us to sit in it. And
Yeah.
by sitting in it, we started to see the subtle signs that we were missing before, because they were very subtle. It was it was not that suddenly a conversation that was being immediately shut down with a very strong emotional response suddenly became a two-way grown-up conversation. It wasn't that. It was just that it was perhaps met with silence to begin with, rather
Mm.
than a huge emotional response. Or even then it moved fairly quickly to me being able to voice something. We started to call it the elephant in the room, I think, sometimes, didn't we? It started to voice something that was, you know, anyone could see that was going
Yeah.
on in a situation, and I would be able to voice that, and it moved from just being met with silence, just being able to listen to it, and that was fine for me to say, it's great that you've been able to listen to that, thank you, and then leave, to then be able to get an acknowledgement, a yes or a maybe, or I think you might be right, or just a word or two of
Yeah.
agreement, but it couldn't move any further than that, to then um very, very slowly being able to start to have some back and forth two-way conversation about it. Um, and not always, it hasn't been linear. So it's not like once we've achieved something, we achieve it again in all circumstances. You know, it does depend on the day and the time always, and the topic. You know, some are more difficult than others.
Yeah.
Um, but just being able to offer that challenge and then to be able to use it, I think from there, again, through talking it through with you, gave me the confidence to push it even further, because anything anything that's even resembles praise has
Mm.
always been a massive anxiety provoker.
Mhm.
But getting to the point where I can now say, I know you're able to listen to this. You know, I know that you're able to listen to this, and it will be helpful if we can have a conversation about it and talk about something that's quite difficult, would have, I think, helps to has helped as well to increase that confidence and self-esteem, because for her to be able to listen to something positive, me having faith, having trust, having belief in her, has been huge.
Mm. And part of the work around self-esteem is getting them to think about their qualities, but also encouraging them to look at what they have successfully achieved. And for a lot of people who have chronic anxiety and low mood, it's very easy to shut the other person down by saying, well, that's your opinion, or
Yeah.
it's always me, everything, it must be me, I am the problem.
Yeah.
But when I'm able to challenge and then reiterate that through to you and the carer, and they're able to reiterate and challenge, it becomes a very interesting, well, everybody's saying, no, hang on a minute. And one of the pivotal points, I think, for all of us happened very early on. We're saying session 3, where the young person had a problem with their computer, shut down, tried to clean it, ordered the spare part. They'd done everything they had, everything a very typical situation lended itself to, where you order the part, you think you've got it sussed, and then the part doesn't arrive. And then you realize that you're not actually able to communicate with the outside world, and you're very dependent on that. And it really brought into the frame of how much responsibility this young person just literally insisted on absorbing, going, it must be me, everything's all my fault.
Yeah.
And I was able to take each step apart to show our young person, well, how could that possibly have been your fault? Were you the Amazon delivery? How could that possibly have been your fault? You've paid for it, you've ordered it, you've paid for it. Now you're dependent on other people. And when you start to gently challenge and go, hey, how is that possible? The young person's beginning to hear a very different sort of mantra, as it were, of how is that possible? And then we had that really beautiful moment, and I'm not going to spoil it. I'm going to let Anna tell it because it was just so lovely. Anna experienced it firsthand. Tell me what happened. Talk about the hook. It was such a small,
It was so tiny.
insignificant amount.
Yeah. Around that same time, she'd been working quite a lot on her room as well, hadn't she? Because her space is a challenge to organize. She'd been working quite a lot on her room, and she had suggested that some hooks, those hooks that you go over the top of the door, would be really useful. So she'd chosen some herself as well. And so I ordered them for her, and they arrived, and I gave them to her, and she said she would put them up, which was all fairly standard. And the personal assistant and I waited and waited and waited and waited and waited. And this is one of the times we would have gone in and rescued. We didn't. We didn't do it for her. We just kept mentioning it every now and again. Not constantly, but every couple of days, one of us would say, "Oh, you're gonna put your hooks up, or how about your hooks? Maybe you could do your hooks today," something like that. And it was always met with yes, 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 but it never happened. And it did go on for quite a long time. And then I just walked in to her room, and she just said to me, I said something or did something, I don't know. Maybe I took a cup of tea, and I can't remember the intricacies of it, but I was on my way back out of the room, and she just went, "Have you noticed anything?" And I looked at the door, and the hooks were done. So she taken them out of the package, screwed them together, and hooked them over the door. But it was just that have you noticed anything? And it was such a tiny thing. She's so capable of screwing some hooks together and putting them over a door, but actually doing it, especially when it's sat there for days and days and days, because then the demand builds up and up and up. And she's definitely been used to a pattern where if she avoids a demand for long enough, somebody will just come in and do it for her, because it's annoyed them to the point that they just want, oh, I want to forget about those blooming hooks, so I'll do it. And nobody had. And
Yes.
that was, I think that was a real visual turning point for all of us.
Yeah. And I think the other thing as well, it's important to note that for many, many young people who come to see me, they have a very complex autistic presentation. And when you put pathological demand avoidance into the mix, it's awful in the sense that, there is demands from the environment, from people, from things, but also the expectation. And a lot of people with PDA cannot accept compliments. It's just too much. This way around, have you noticed anything? Really showed a glimmer of a flame of, I've got a little bit of self-esteem and I would like you to notice. Thank you very much. Have you noticed? Because it was beaming of, yeah, I've done it, I've achieved it. And, you know, we do laugh because it's such a small, insignificant thing in the grand scheme of things. But that was a real major turning point for us all, because we could see that glimmer of a flame of change. And it just kind of just made us work that little bit more intensely, I think, as a team. I don't know if you agree.
Yes. I think it did, because it links back to what I was saying before, doesn't it? About how even when we voiced we weren't going to step in, one of us would do.
Yes.
Because there's something about that demand avoidance that really increases anxiety across the house, not just within the person, but who's experiencing it. But it just sort of, that anxiety just sort of spews out across the whole house. And it is so much easier to just step in and do whatever it is that's causing the demand, reduce the anxiety levels across the whole house. It's a bit like, it always reminds me a little bit like, I don't know, there's people in my family that are terrified of spiders, like really terrified. That whole, it's a spider. So what do you do just to shut or down all the chaos about this spider? You just go in and you scoop it up and you get rid of it. And it's a bit like scooping up the spider and getting rid of it, and everyone just breathes a sigh of relief and carries on. But it's not, although it's helpful in the moment, we learn, you know, that really showed us visually how unhelpful it is to always just dash in and scoop the spider.
And the other side of this as well is, in the past, our young person has set themselves very big, unrealistic goals to achieve. And so that feels such a massive failure. And then, of course, that then ricochets, like you say, and it just all comes crashing down, doesn't it? Just the risks suddenly escalate to undescribable levels. The anxiety, like you say, is just going around. But when we have a young person who says, okay, I'm going to put the hooks up, and it's such a nice, small, achievable thing, and to then, against, you know, the PDA protocol, as it were, of I'm not going to accept compliments, I struggle with compliments, to then almost ask for the compliment, like, have you noticed, is incredible.